Welcome back to Casual Watch Reviews. A couple of weeks ago, if you remember, I interviewed Peter, one of the founders over at Jack Mason. They'd sent me at that time one of their hydro timers in for review. I was far more impressed than I thought I was going to be about that watch. So after we reviewed the hydro timer a couple of weeks ago, been pestering Peter to see if he would send me one of their GMTs. And this is the Espresso GMT Strat-o-Timer. So big thanks for them for sending me another watch in for review. So let's dive in. Let's start with the case dimensions. We have a very wearable 40mm case with one of my favourite lug widths, 20mm. There's just a whole ton of strap choices for that lug width. We have a lug-to-lug of 47mm, which means it spans the wrist very nicely. This is complemented by a 200m water resistance, which is even more impressive considering the entire watch is only 13mm thick. The loom is looking sharp using Swiss Luminova BGW9. The bezel is also loomed behind this glossy sapphire overlay. Not as bright as the hands, but to be expected. Looking straight at the watch, you can't help but be drawn to that brown and black bezel. This is a 48-click bezel, allowing it to be altered to countries that have half time zones like Sri Lanka. That's why there's 48 instead of 24. The bezel has a nice action on here. It's slightly stiffer, even though it is omnidirectional. It's slightly stiffer than the bezel that we saw on the hydro timer, but it is omnidirectional, so you can move it backwards and forwards. The movement in here is also impressive. Jack Mason was one of the very early adopters of the Miyota 9075 GMT movement, utilizing what's called a traveler GMT function and a 42-hour power reserve. A traveler's GMT, or as Jack Mason referred to it as a jumping local hour GMT, has the same functionality to how a Rolex GMT Master 2 works. This allows you to jump the main hour hand back and forth to quickly change the time zone of the watch without affecting the GMT hand or stopping the watch's second hand. Very handy if you travel between time zones like I do in the US and you need to skip back and forth an hour or two. It's not everyone's favorite, as some GMT fans prefer what's known as a caller GMT. This is where the GMT hand itself independently moves with its own crown position. This is handy if you stay in the same time zone, but you need to change the GMT hand to reference another time zone. Those are just a couple of examples. There is a few pluses and minuses depending on which GMT method is used. The Espresso time here can also use its bezel to reference different time zones as opposed to a fixed bezel on, say, something like a Rolex Explorer 2, but it lacks any 24-hour dial markings on the main dial, which would enable you to perhaps track a third time zone. Another thing to note, the Traveler GMT, like on the Jack Mason, doesn't have a quick set date, meaning you have to revolve the hands around until you get the date you want. No big deal if you wear the watch all the time, but can become a little tedious if you rotate through a lot of watches in your collection. And for reference, a caller GMT does have a quick set date. And nicely, the movement in here is also regulated in the US with an accuracy of plus or minus 5 seconds per day. Without regulation, this movement stock accuracy is plus 30 to minus 10 seconds per day. I have to say mine is closer to minus 7 seconds a day. The company does offer a regulation service should you notice a big deviation, but this one doesn't bother me enough to go into that. Minus 7 seconds, of course, is very livable with. The watch is designed in Dallas and the QC and regulation is done in the US also. Clearly the components are sourced from suppliers in multiple countries. The case is fantastic on this watch and clearly has some nods to classic design without being a homage of any particular one. The case feels solid in the hand and it's clear a lot of thought has gone into the wearability. It's very comfortable to wear, one of the comfiest that I've reviewed for a while. This reminds me of my feelings towards the Christopher Ward Lightcatcher case. That's still my favourite in this price range, but Jack Mason still does a solid job here. The case features a screw down crown to complement that 200 meters water resistance. The bracelet is fantastic, honestly, and has 7-part links, their interpretation of the Rolex Jubilee. It has screw-in links for adjustment and tapers from 20 to 16. This watch can be worn by a varied range of wrist sizes because of how the case wears and how they've constructed the bracelet. Here you can see it on my 7.2 inch wrist. But the excellent hidden feature is in the clasp, and it's a very slim adjustable system. One of the best that I have seen. Easy to adjust and very thin considering how much extra room it gives. gives. You simply lift one side of the bracelet up, move it up or down, and then press it back down to lock in that position. Very good if your wrist swells in the heat like mine does. The dial is framed by a double dome box sapphire, which gives a great look without distorting the dial. The hands are clear, and a touch of photina on the GMT hand is a nice contrast and matches the colouring of the bezel markings and also the little dash of colour above the indices. If I was being a little bit picky here, I would like to see what the hands or indices would look like if they were the same width. Maybe slightly thinner indices or slightly thicker hands. One thing I do know from interviewing Peter is every detail of these watches has been poured over multiple times, so maybe thinner indices were mocked up and it just looked weird. The classic text font used on the dial and the fact that they've used a star as opposed to writing Jack Mason on the dial I think is perfect and ties the overall design together. The date framing and brush and polish elements on the hands and the geometric indices give a lot of visual interest to the dial, really making it look like a far more expensive watch than what it is in reality. This watch is their Espresso colorway. I think this looks the most classic, but they have something for everyone. Classic Batman style one and then a Pepsi one, of course. The watch retails for about $1,000 on the bracelet, and I would definitely get it on the bracelet for sure. They do have a really cool Tropic strap that I reviewed on their Hydro timer that has a lovely supple feel to it, but I would add this aftermarket if you are looking for one. Definitely get it on the bracelet. The watch comes with a little travel pouch and also a really cool box that they've made look like a book, and they use felt in there to simulate the pages. So we got to the most important part of the review, is what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments section down below. And if you want to let me know live, join us for the big show, the Sunday Social. Appreciate you watching. See you next time on Casual Watch Reviews.